We spend so much of our lives trying to force the body to change, believing that progress must come through strain, discipline, and struggle. Yet the human body does not evolve through punishment, it evolves through signals. When the right signal is repeated daily, something remarkable happens. Inflammation quiets, energy reallocates, and tissues begin to rebuild as if the body finally recognizes it is safe to change. Imagine how easily we overlook the smallest habits, especially in a culture that celebrates extremes. We are conditioned to believe that meaningful change must feel dramatic, exhausting, and visibly difficult. If it doesn't hurt, if it doesn't demand sacrifice, we assume it cannot possibly matter. Yet the human body has never operated on spectacle. It operates on repetition, rhythm, and cooperation. A small daily habit, almost forgettable in its simplicity, can reshape how the body feels and responds, because biology is less impressed by intensity than it is by consistency. From a scientific perspective, the body is constantly listening. Every day it receives signals about safety, scarcity, stress, and support. These signals come from how we move, how we eat, how we rest, and how predictable our routines are. When signals are chaotic or overwhelming, the body prioritizes defense. It conserves energy, holds onto resources, and remains on alert. This is not a flaw, but a survival mechanism refined over thousands of years. The mistake many people make is assuming that more force will override this response, when in reality it often strengthens it. Progress, in biological terms, is rarely loud. Muscle does not rebuild itself in moments of exhaustion, but in periods of recovery. Inflammation does not calm when the body is under constant attack, but when it senses stability. Gentle signals, repeated with patience, tell the nervous system that the environment is predictable and safe. Only then does the body feel free to allocate energy toward repair instead of protection. This is why a modest habit done daily can outperform intense efforts done sporadically. There is also a psychological dimension that mirrors this biology. When habits are extreme, they are often short-lived. The body and mind both resist what feels unsustainable. A small habit, however, slips past resistance. It does not trigger fear, dread, or fatigue. It becomes part of the background of life, and in doing so, it gains power. Each repetition reinforces the same message. There is no emergency here, no threat, no need to brace. Over time, this quiet consistency reshapes internal priorities. Energy that was once spent managing stress responses becomes available for tissue maintenance and renewal. The systems responsible for regulating inflammation begin to recalibrate. The body shifts from reacting to cooperating. What appears from the outside as a subtle change is, internally, a profound reorganization. This is why transformation often surprises people. They expect progress to announce itself with struggle, yet it arrives through calm repetition. The body responds not because it is forced, but because it is finally given a signal it understands and trusts. A signal repeated often enough to become believable. When inflammation is discussed, it is often framed as something harmful that must be eliminated, but biologically it is far more nuanced. Inflammation is a form of communication. It is the body's way of saying that something requires attention, whether that is injury, excess demand, or imbalance. In its proper role, it is brief and purposeful, arriving when needed and retreating once its job is done. Problems arise not because inflammation exists, but because it no longer knows when to turn itself off. As we age and adapt to modern routines, that conversation changes. The body is exposed to repeated stresses that are subtle but constant. Poor sleep, irregular meals, mental strain, and reduced movement all add background noise to the system. Over time, inflammatory signals stop being clear messages and become a steady hum. The body remains on low-level alert, never fully settling into a state where repair and rebuilding can take priority. This quiet, persistent inflammation does not announce itself dramatically, but it steadily drains energy and resilience. From a scientific viewpoint, this chronic state shifts how resources are used. When the body believes it is under continuous threat, It diverts energy toward protection. Muscles receive less support, recovery slows, and fat storage becomes a form of insurance. This is not dysfunction but strategy. The body is doing exactly what it is designed to do when it perceives instability. Understanding this reframes the issue from one of failure to one of miscommunication. What becomes fascinating is how responsive this system is when the message changes. Certain nutritional inputs, provided consistently and without excess, appear to soften unnecessary alarms. They do not silence inflammation entirely, nor should they. Instead, they help refine the signal. The body begins to distinguish between true threats and background stress. When that distinction returns, inflammation becomes situational again rather than constant. This shift has cascading effects. When the inflammatory environment calms, hormonal signaling improves. Cells become more receptive to energy and nutrients. Repair processes that were once delayed begin to resume their natural rhythm. The body no longer feels compelled to guard every resource, and in that release it finds room to restore balance. There is also an important psychological parallel. When people stop viewing inflammation as an enemy to fight, they approach their bodies with greater curiosity and patience. This change in mindset aligns with the biological shift. Calm inputs paired with consistent habits reinforce the message that the environment is stable. The body listens, adjusts, and responds accordingly. Seen through this lens, inflammation is not something to fear, but something to understand. It is a language the body speaks fluently. When we learn to communicate back in ways it recognizes, the conversation becomes quieter, clearer, and far more productive, allowing the body to redirect its efforts from constant vigilance toward renewal and long-term resilience. Fat and muscle are often described as opposites, as if one must disappear for the other to exist. But the biology tells a more interconnected story. These tissues are not enemies competing for space. They are part of a shared system that manages energy, stability, and survival. Both respond to the same internal signals, and both change their behavior depending on how the body interprets its environment. When those signals are clear and supportive, muscle is maintained and strengthened. When they are confusing or threatening, fat becomes a form of protection. From a cellular perspective, fat is not simply stored energy sitting idle. It is metabolically active, constantly communicating with hormones and other tissues. Muscle, in the same way, is not just for movement. It is a major regulator of blood sugar, metabolism, and overall resilience. When inflammation is elevated and persistent, this communication becomes distorted. Muscle cells become less responsive to growth signals, and fat cells receive stronger messages to hold on to energy. The body is not making a mistake. It is responding logically to what it perceives as uncertainty. When inflammation quiets, a subtle but important shift occurs. Insulin sensitivity improves, meaning cells can more easily take in and use energy instead of storing it. Muscle tissue begins to respond more efficiently to everyday movement, and fat tissue no longer needs to act as a safety reserve. This change does not require extreme dieting or punishing exercise. It happens because the internal environment becomes more predictable and less defensive. What often surprises people is how naturally this process unfolds once conditions improve. There is no dramatic switch, no single moment where everything changes. Instead, the body slowly rebalances. Muscle repair becomes more efficient, and excess fat begins to release energy it no longer needs to guard. This is why some individuals notice changes in body composition without drastic alterations to their routine. The biology was always capable. It simply needed clearer instructions. Another important aspect is energy allocation. The body has a finite amount of energy to distribute each day. When much of it is consumed by managing inflammation and stress responses, there is little left for muscle maintenance. As that burden eases, energy becomes available for rebuilding. Muscle growth, even modest growth, is an energy-expensive process, and the body will only invest in it when conditions feel favorable. This reframing removes much of the frustration people feel. Instead of blaming willpower or age, The focus shifts to environment and signaling. Fat loss and muscle gain are not opposing goals to be forced into submission. They are coordinated responses to internal clarity. When the body understands that it is supported and not under constant threat, it naturally moves toward a composition that favors strength, efficiency, and long-term stability. What makes this entire process so compelling is how closely it reflects a broader pattern. In human health and behavior, we often search for transformation in dramatic interventions, believing that change must arrive through disruption. Yet biology tells a quieter story. The systems that keep us alive evolved not for extremes, but for continuity. They respond to patterns, not events. When small choices are repeated, they accumulate meaning, and over time that meaning reshapes the body in ways that no single effort ever could. There is a tendency to view health as something external, something to be imposed on the body through discipline or correction. But the body is not a machine waiting to be fixed. It is a responsive organism, constantly adapting to the signals it receives. When those signals are chaotic, the body adapts defensively. When they are calm and consistent, it adapts constructively. This is not philosophy layered on top of science. It is the science itself, observed at every level from cellular behavior to whole-body adaptation. Small, deliberate choices work because they align with how the body expects information to arrive. A regular input tells the body what to expect tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. Predictability reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty lowers stress responses. Lower stress responses free up energy. That energy is then invested in repair, maintenance, and resilience. Nothing about this process is rushed, yet nothing about it is wasted. This perspective also restores a sense of agency that many people lose over time. When health is framed as something that requires heroic effort, it can feel inaccessible. When it is framed as cooperation, it becomes personal and sustainable. Each small choice becomes a conversation with the body, a way of saying that care is ongoing, not occasional. Over time, these conversations build trust, and the body responds accordingly. There is humility in this approach. It accepts that the body has its own intelligence, shaped long before modern fitness culture existed. Instead of overriding that intelligence, small, consistent actions work with it. They respect the pace at which biological systems change. They honor the fact that healing and adaptation are processes, not outcomes to be forced on a schedule. What emerges from this is not just physical change, but a different relationship with one's own body. Curiosity replaces frustration. Observation replaces judgment. Health becomes less about control and more about stewardship. When aggression gives way to understanding, the body no longer resists. It participates. In that cooperation lies a quiet strength, not the kind that announces itself immediately, but the kind that endures. The kind that grows slowly, steadily, and reliably, shaped by choices so small they are easy to repeat, yet powerful enough to guide the body back toward balance, capacity, and resilience. Muscle growth, particularly later in life, is often misunderstood as something that must be forced through intensity and exhaustion. This belief comes from decades of messaging that equates progress with strain. Biologically, however, muscle is cautious tissue. It does not grow simply because it is stressed. It grows when it receives a clear message that rebuilding is safe, supported, and necessary. Without that reassurance, the body prioritizes preservation over expansion, regardless of effort. As the body ages, it becomes more selective with its resources. This is not decline, but discernment. Muscle tissue is metabolically expensive to maintain, and the body will not invest in it unless the internal environment signals stability. If inflammation is high, recovery is inconsistent, or nutrition is unreliable, the message the body receives is one of uncertainty. In that state, even intense exercise can fail to produce results because the body is protecting itself rather than adapting. Permission in this context is created by consistency and internal calm. When inflammation is reduced and nutrients are delivered regularly, the body begins to interpret movement differently. A simple contraction, a modest load, or even controlled daily activity suddenly carries more meaning. The same movement that once felt ineffective now triggers a stronger adaptive response because the body is prepared to listen. Muscle cells become more responsive to growth signals, and repair processes become more efficient. This is why some people experience noticeable changes without increasing the intensity of their training. The difference is not the effort applied, but the environment in which that effort occurs. When the internal conditions improve, the threshold for adaptation lowers. The body no longer needs extreme stimulus to justify rebuilding. It recognizes that maintaining muscle is not a liability but an asset. There is also a neurological component to this process. The nervous system plays a central role in muscle activation and coordination. When the body is under chronic stress, neural signals are dampened and cautious. As internal stress decreases, communication between the brain and muscles becomes clearer. Movements feel more controlled, strength expresses itself more readily, and confidence in movement increases. This neural clarity amplifies the effect of even modest physical activity. This perspective changes how people approach movement. Exercise becomes less about punishment and more about conversation. Each movement asks a question, and the body responds based on how safe it feels. When the answer is consistently reassuring, the response grows stronger over time. Muscle growth then becomes a byproduct of alignment rather than aggression. Understanding this removes pressure and frustration. It explains why effort alone is not always rewarded and why patience often is. Muscle does not need to be coerced into growing. It needs the conditions that make growth logical. When those conditions are met, the body does what it has always been designed to do, rebuilding strength not through force, but through readiness and trust.